Hello and welcome again to Mitchell Talks Energy with the editor of OK Energy Today, Jerry Bohnen. Good to see you, Jerry.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I see we have in the process, as we record this, we're in the process of the federal government walking back from the brink
Hmm.
in terms of the debt ceiling situation, which is a whole financial aspect of it. But I'm really interested in a couple of stories that are coming out of this. One of them that I was reading on OK Energy Today involves Senator Manchin from West Virginia, who has been like the prime minister up until the last election. If Joe Manchin was more important than the president because you had to get everything past him. And we've been talking about permitting and how that there was permitting was an aspect of these negotiations. And we've talked about how the state of Washington delays coal shipments and how the state of New York makes it
Hmm.
difficult for Williams to get their natural gas out. And so the politics of energy. Manchin got something included in this, and it's really fascinating to me. Can you help us understand how this played into the debt ceiling and what Senator Manchin has gotten done that's important for America's energy future?
Well, what he got installed was the stalled natural gas pipeline along the East Coast, which will connect West Virginia and Virginia. And it's worth, I can't recall the exact price, $7 or $8 billion. So this has been stalled for some time. You might recall how Manchin was very pivotal to the Biden administration when it first came into office, and they made some promises to him, and then he felt they reneged on the promises, and that's why he's become even more of a. I don't want to call him a renegade U.S. senator, but maybe in the eyes of the Biden administration, he's become that way. Even though he's a Democrat, at times the Republicans seem to believe that he might come over to their side, and he has on some energy issues. Of course, he's a coal state, and that's important to him. He knows his politics back home, and the coal miners, they support him. And this whole permitting thing has been pushed, of course, by some Oklahoma members of Congress and others throughout the western part of the United States, especially where the oil and gas industry is critical to some of the state's economies. The Biden administration has been slow walking permits for drilling, and that was part and parcel of some of the debt negotiations. And so they came across with it with promises to speed up some of the permitting process, because when you start getting into the permitting process, especially for oil and gas, you might be talking anywhere from 6 months to a year when you seek that application or file that application for the permit before you can actually start spudding a well. And that time is money for these industries. And that was critical to all of this. And that's what happened with the natural gas pipeline in West Virginia and Virginia. So if it's a done deal, as soon as the U.S. Senate votes on it, even though with all the controversy among the conservative element of the Republicans in the House who voted against it, a lot of Democrats sided with Biden's agreement. It's the politics is just fascinating, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
how the conservative element of the Republican Party in the U.S. House, such as Oklahoma Representative Josh Burkeen, he's one of those. He voted against it. And let's see, I can't recall who else. Some of the others were for it. Of course, Tom Cole and Stephanie Bice, they voted for it. So they tend to believe that Biden did not get the upper hand on them, that they were successful in getting him to cut back some of the expenditures that have just literally been rampant since he took office a few years ago.
It's interesting to watch the spin afterwards, isn't it? I mean, I was
Mhm.
listening to the president's folks, I was listening to McCarthy, how they all spun this. It's also interesting to look at the row. When you see Bobert and AOC on the same side, that's an interesting level. So it's sort of like if you want to kind of categorize how people's philosophies are, just take a look at the yays and nays.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
you
I,
kind
I
of see
like
where the
to, I
centrists
do that
are.
a lot on
Yeah.
some energy issues, going through the House votes and see how typically the Oklahoma delegation in the House always votes together. Well, sometimes.
Yeah. So
This-
they didn't on this one. The vote, as we record, the vote was just last night, but Rakeen was a no. Um, we know where Frank was.
I don't know. At one time, as of yesterday, he was an unknown. He had not revealed how he might vote.
So you see the folks that are close to leadership. You mentioned Congresswoman Bice, Congressman Cole. I was watching some live television yesterday when there were people testifying in front of rules. I saw Congressman Cole there. It was interesting, but it'll happen. I mean, it's going to happen in the Senate now, so it'll get over to the. I'm assuming it's going to happen in the Senate. A
Yes,
few
yes.
more hotheads in the House than there are in the Senate. So
You know, a quick aside. I find it interesting that Representative Bice is gaining stature in Washington D.C. and at least among some of the press corps and the networks that she seems to have or be wielding more and more influence in regarding to her experience. I mean, she's just not a freshman representative anymore. She's not a second term now, but it seems like she is carrying a little more weight.
yeah, and it's indisputable that the two heavyweights in the delegation in the House are Cole and Lucas. I mean,
Yes,
that's just the facts. They are, and then you have some of the other members that are not as quite as at the center of power. Lucas and Cole have been there forever. I mean, that's part of that,
it's
right?
true. Yeah.
They've been there forever. So, and then we're watching the Senate side where Senator Langford obviously is in a very powerful position over in the Senate. So those three, and then you were talking about Congresswoman Bice making a move towards that,
She is,
uh,
and
certainly getting some power.
and Representative Kevin Hern isn't so far, out of the conversation either, because of his conservative fiscal beliefs and the positions he carries. As for Lucas, he now chairs. Remember when he chaired the House Ag Committee and worked on the Farm Bill some years ago, and now he's in charge of the House Science Technology Committee, and I mean, he's always firing off a letter to the Energy Department or some Biden administration official. The most recent that I had a story about this week was the House Committee, and usually it's a bipartisan effort that they want to explore safety research and development for hazardous or rail shipments of hazardous materials, this stemming from the East Palestine, Ohio disaster that we had some months ago. So Lucas is also getting into NASA and weather studies. I know, let's see, the state climatologist, Gary McManus, is supposed to be testifying here later this month before that House committee, and they start getting into weather data. So Lucas is not just a he's not just a Western Oklahoma farmer rancher anymore. He's somebody delving into the sciences and the energy and all of that application.
Yeah, he told me, well, maybe 6 months ago, we were doing an interview that the science committee was a fun committee.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, "This is fun." And you know what? We should have him on sometime soon and ask
Yes.
him about the UFO study.
Yeah.
Okay. When I just flipped on the TV yesterday and they're having those committees about UFOs. I mean, how long has this been going on? Can I tell an aside? Okay. So
Yeah.
back when I was at the University of Oklahoma, I was assigned by a name you'll remember, a guy by the name of Tim Granahan, who was my news director at
Oh,
KGOU.
yeah.
And there was this new movie out from a guy who'd gotten a little little notoriety a couple of summers before. Spielberg, I believe, was his name, and he
Oh,
did this
yeah.
movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And a man named J. Allen Hynek, Hynek, came to OU, and there was 25 people there, and I was the cub reporter from KGU and got to interview the guy. And J. Allen Hynek, you'll see him. He ran Project Bluebird or Blue Book. I'm not sure one
Blue
of the
Book.
two. Blue Book.
Hmm.
And Hulu or Netflix, somebody did a series called Project Blue Book, and there's an actor who plays Alan Hynek. He comes up at the end of Close Encounters and rubs his beard. But anyway, it was back then they were having hearings, and we had discussions in college, and it ebbs and flows, right? UFOs and JFK and grassy knoll, but it's just been going on forever. And when I looked up there yesterday, do you think any sort of folks that believe in UFOs, that they're extraterrestrials, are going to listen to anything that happens on that panel and believe it?
No.
No.
Yeah, the Project Blue Book, I remember reading the book back in 1960 or 61 when I was a wee lad. but but I always had an interest in aviation and things like that. And yeah, it caught my attention back that far. That's 60 years ago. And of course, then we're not all that far from eastern New Mexico, where you had the most famous of all, UFO supposed sightings, and all of that.
The city of Roswell that's
Yeah.
their number one tourist
I know it.
destination.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Alan Hynek, I will never forget the story about how, man, if I only had that tape, but it was how that they would, in Project Blue Book, so you probably read this, how that they would interview people who had close encounters. Close encounters of the third kind, meaning actual encounter with an alien.
Hmm.
Second kind, an encounter with their technology. Number one, you see something. And how that people who had close encounters of the third kind, if they were in Kentucky or the Sudan, they described the aliens the exact same way. As he said, a bushman in Uganda or the Sudan and a hillbilly in Kentucky telling you the same thing. It's not exactly like they were on Facebook talking to each other, right?
Exactly. Not at that time. Yeah. If I can even tell, well, okay, even though we're getting away from some energy, but there's still energy related stories here. A friend of mine is Gary Stearman.
Oh, yeah.
And
I loved Gary Stearman's show on KTOK for many years.
Yeah, exactly. And Gary, he is related to the Stearman family.
The biplane people.
Yes, of the Stearman airplane from Wichita, Kansas. And his uncles went to work for, Boeing and the other aircraft manufacturers, and worked for the government during World War II and the early 50s. And Gary can relate some very fascinating stories about what his uncles did and what they could tell him regarding their research and how they were called away in the middle of the night to handle certain reports of UFOs.
Oh,
it makes you go, what? This happened then? Stories of crashed vehicles being, guarded by American soldiers somewhere in southern Colorado. And then in the morning, it was gone. Of course, southern Colorado, you get into the area around the Great Sand Dunes, west of the I can't think of the range, the Rocky Mountains, the Sangre de Cristos, and out there, that's almost another tourism mecca because of the supposed belief that for some reason that is an area that is it's just featured so much in claims of UFO sightings. Okay.
That's
Enough
amazing.
of this.
I used to listen to Gary Stearman and enjoyed him. Someone he did the Garden Show.
Yes.
Many years ago. Well, I'm glad and he's alive and doing well.
Yes.
Okay,
Last I heard he is. Yes.
wonderful. All right, so
And
then that
Gary was a pilot too. So there are other stories that we don't need to get into this morning.
gotcha.
Some of the weird things. Yeah.
All right, that's a whole nother one, but that's on my list now. Um, we can't have a Mitchell Talks Energy with OK Energy today without talking about the latest request by utility for a rate hike, right?
OG&E. And they submitted this Wednesday. And they are asking for permission from the Corporation Commission to replace two of the aging units at the Horseshoe Lake in eastern Oklahoma County, I believe it is. It's east of Oklahoma City where there's a power plant. And they say if it's approved, it would mean another $2.20 for the typical or average residential customer. So they're trying to make the case that they need to do this all in the name of cleaning up the environment and climate and things of that nature. I thought it was interesting, of course, not being critical of their press release, but the press release that I did receive late Wednesday afternoon. It was several paragraphs long. It talked about the whole process that they have to go through, why they need to do this, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the very end is when they revealed, oh, by the way, this is what it will cost and what it will mean to the ratepayers. So it's like you had indicated at one time, another week, another rate hike request by a utility in the state of Oklahoma. And then last week, I had all these stories regarding a public service company and its request, and also, let's see, Arkansas Oklahoma Gas Company regarding its request for securitization. Actually, what it was trying to do was recover costs from the 2021 winter storm. And so that is still nagging ratepayers all throughout Oklahoma and Arkansas. And then I had the story this week too, kind of laying out some of the details of the lawsuit filed by Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach against Macari or Macari, however you want to pronounce it, the natural gas company. That's a whole detailed story in itself.
Yeah, it's worth watching because the Kansas AG he's doing some digging, right? I mean, that's what's
Yes.
going on there.
Yeah. And, he's estimating the impact on consumers in Kansas because of that. Of course, let's recap here. Macari was sued by Kobach, I believe it was in December and January, and accused of price manipulation during that winter storm in February of 2021. He's estimating the impact on consumers was $50 million in additional cost, but that they are still going through some of the cost streams. And he says it could be much, much more. I was intrigued by the fact, Scott, that this has the tentacles reaching deeper into Oklahoma than many suspect. And that is because of what's called the Southern Star natural gas system, which producers in Oklahoma, Southern Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle, Western Oklahoma, they supply this. And that is where the price of natural gas is set primarily for the state of Kansas. And what happened here was Macari, we'll call it Macari, okay? Just to settle on the pronunciation here. And what Kobach is alleging is that company, typically prices are set at the beginning of a month. And so when a company acquires natural gas, they can acquire that on that rate. And in the beginning of February of 2021, the price was around $2.50 or so, roughly, per a million cubic feet of natural gas. And the Attorney General in Kansas alleges that Macri waited until like the 16th or 17th when there was such a demand, and they put in one bid that shot this price up to $633, et cetera. Just was an incredible bounce here for that company. And he's alleging that it was all in the name of trying to increase income for the company. And you raise the question, well, how can just one bid do that? Because only one or two bids are made on such an occasion like that. And so they have consequently a great impact on the overall cost for natural gas. And it really helped that company a great, great deal, at least in the eyes of the Attorney General of Kansas. And so I also again asked the Attorney General Gentner Drummond's office in Oklahoma, has he ever reached a decision? What is he doing in regards to this? And he's still taking a look at it. That's the word we got from them. But, and of course, Macri also supplied some companies and utilities in Oklahoma with natural gas. So it's all interwoven like this. And it makes you wonder, why isn't the state of Oklahoma doing more to get aggressive in regards to an investigation, at least a public investigation, and holding somebody accountable? Because what happened was all the utilities, or not all, but a majority of the utilities in Oklahoma went through the securitization and the bond process, and now we're paying for this over almost 3 decades.
It's an interesting story that, as you say, was worth watching. It's a legal story. It's an investigative story. I know when you've written about it for years, News 9 and OK Watch did a story, and I talked with both Dana Hertnick and Paul Monies, and they said, man, it's hard to get down to why.
Yeah.
Right. So, the elemental things we learn in J school, who, what, when, where, why is the one that they couldn't come up with.
Yeah.
So.
And I believe, I was thinking about this yesterday regarding Macri, that I think all it will take is the Attorney General in Kansas to get, I guess, subpoena power to seek emails of the individuals who made the decisions for Macri on or during that winter storm. And those could be very, very revealing, or they could be damning, or they could clear the company as well.
That's true. Now, back to a privacy thing. People are all the time bringing up, well, we should make legislators' email addresses public record. It's fascinating. Hey, before we run completely out of time, another story that you did this week, which is really interesting as we move forward in this EV revolution. And by the way, I just finished a series on how that the car makers are really, really going to be fighting over what's in the dashboard of these EVs. If you have Apple CarPlay or Google Maps or subscription services, fascinating. But one of them is the state, especially the state of Oklahoma, and they've been dueling with Kansas on the Panasonic thing, and they deal with Texas. They tried to compete against Texas on the Tesla thing. So the region is full of competition for projects. But Canoe, it continues to be what was it that Churchill said about the Soviet Union, a riddle, an enigma wrapped in a riddle about what's going on with this company. Now they've not only done, Canoe's not only got to deal with Oklahoma, they got to deal with Oklahoma City. And I think the line that caught my eye in your story is they could be running out of cash, and their stock's been downgraded. We've watched that one. Help us unwrap what's going on here, Jerry.
Canoe's struggled for months and months and months. And what's happening is apparently they're they really are running out of cash. Uh, and it remains to be seen whether they will be able to go ahead and complete the renovation and actual creation of a manufacturing plant in Oklahoma City along I-40 on the western side of the city, where they, as part of a deal with the state, they could get $7.8 million in incentives from the state commerce department. And at last word, Canoe officials were in talks with commerce leaders about their situation. Of course, also at risk here is a $1 million incentive from the city of Oklahoma City, which approved it back in December. Some city council members expressed some doubts about this company. Canoe also has a deal for construction of an EV manufacturing plant in Pryor's Industrial Park in the northeast part of the state. They are in Texas now, but they also last year moved their headquarters to Arkansas. So you've got the three states that are dealing with them, and Canoe is just struggling. But at the same time, Scott, they have some big contract commitments. They're producing a vehicle for the Army. I believe Walmart is also has a deal with Canoe for some of their delivery vehicles. So I don't know. There at one time here, 2 months ago, the company sold some bonds or shares, I guess, in the company. I do not recall the specific amount, but it certainly, got a lot of attention at one time, and then it disappeared. And when that happened, I believe shares were around 70, almost 80 cents a unit. And as of Wednesday, I believe it was down to 57 cents. They just continue losing 2 or 3% every day. And it's only maybe a loss of 1 or 2 pennies, but that adds up. And I think Canoe was even warned that they could be removed from the stock exchange because, basically they're getting into penny stock here.
They are. This one. So Brianna Bailey, people may recognize her name when she was at the Oklahoma and wrote the story that you referenced in OK Energy today. $2.8 billion in orders is what Canoe has, according to her story. But it's interesting, and I haven't kept, because the end of the session is, sessions in Oklahoma are generally orderly in February, March, April. Then May comes along, conference committee, and then it all happens at the end. Frankly, I had a conversation with one of my guys that does my weekend shows, Jason Dunnington, who's my Democrat on Your Vote Counts. And we were joking, it's hard to do weekend stories when there's so much news. It overwhelms the Capitol Press Corps when you've got dozens and dozens and dozens of bills and the implication or repercussions from those bills.
Sure.
There were some vetoes. I think that the Senate had held up the governor's choice for a commerce secretary, and the commerce director resigned a few weeks ago, Brent Kissling. So when you read these stories like in Frontier, they're talking with officials. I'm not even sure who they're talking to right now. I mean, there seems to be kind of a vacuum there at the end of the session. Where do you see this going, Jerry?
It makes me think back in the early 1980s when there was a presence of radio and TV in the broadcast press room at the state capitol. One of the stations had up on the wall this wonderful poster, something to the effect that the circus is back in town. And it had all these clowns jumping around. and it was a reference to the Oklahoma legislature. And I don't think they like that characterization, but it's that way with the legislature, isn't it? That come late April, early May, then you really start seeing the politics being played, whether it's hardball or not. And I don't think you're ever going to see any change on that, Scott. Do you?
I don't think so. People who thought that it was going to be orderly, we're both from the era that Republicans were a distinct minority at the legislature,
Yes. Yeah.
and they would play a role. And you know, occasionally a Republican would come in, Bellman, Bartlett, and then most famously Frank Keating, who would battle with them as their numbers began to grow. But now that there are super majorities on both sides, you have I'm not sure the word is fringe, but kind of extremists inside of the inside of those different caucuses, which makes it difficult for the leadership to work, especially in the Senate. They're razor thin majority for the pro tem over there, and so it does. No matter what the parties are, there's always going to be some, like, shall we say, extreme positions taken when you start getting into it, and there are people perfectly willing to blow things up, Jerry.
Oh, yeah. But I don't think the Oklahoma legislature is any different than some aspects of Congress. I mean, in Congress, you've got the really conservative Republicans in the House, who are trying to, flex their muscles, and maybe even because of the debt settlement, try to get remove McCarthy as Speaker of the House. And so you have the same kind of development in the Oklahoma legislature, the extreme conservatives and the Democrats who are, they try to still show that they have some importance in the legislature, by standing up with a press release every now and then. And I think right now it's hard for them to flex any kind of muscle, isn't it, for the Democrats in the state legislature? And that's not to impugn the character of any of the Democratic members of the legislature. It just shows that just how weak they are compared to what they were decades ago.
They just don't have
That's
the numbers.
indicative. Pardon?
Yeah, they just don't have the numbers.
No, but that's indicative of the mood of the people in the state of Oklahoma and how they've transitioned from being a conservative Democratic state to now almost a conservative Republican state.
And not one Democrat, the last information I had looking at the data, not one Democrat has a rural area.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
In 2004, when Republicans took over, there was white male Democrats were the biggest number of legislators in the rural areas. I know. I mean, that was one of those. My dad was one of the last of the leadership in the House that was run by the Democrats. So,
Mm-hmm.
and when it changed,
Yeah, and now the Republicans certainly are strong enough in the legislature that they can afford to have their own inside disputes. The rural versus the metro, fights over school funding, and all of that. So I think what you're really kind of almost saying is that the blue areas of the state of Oklahoma are in the metro.
yeah, and specifically Oklahoma County,
Mm-hmm.
because Oklahoma County has become a purple county, the
Yeah.
district attorney, right? So things have changed a lot. Well, the Canoe thing is going to be an interesting thing to watch. And do you think the Canoe situation, it has to be pretty close to some sort of something's going to happen pretty quickly, because the story your story, the Frontier story clearly indicates that they're running out of money.
Running out of money, and it makes you wonder: are they really going to crash and burn? I mean, seriously.
Well, that's why we read OK Energy today,
Well,
which is
but okay.
easy. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was going to make the point that Canoe could be representative of a lot of these EV companies are having some financial challenges all across the United States. It's that it's almost like they hopped on the bandwagon, to use that old cliche, to take advantage of the green energy money that's being thrown about by the government, and also by enhancements, for EV. Instead of doing it slowly and calculatingly, they just jumped in with both feet. And some companies are challenged by this. They're struggling. So Canoo is not any different than some others. I mean, look at Tesla. They've reduced the prices of their cars because they realize, it costs a lot of money to not only manufacture those cars, but then it costs a lot of money to buy one.
Yeah, it
And
does.
and if people aren't buying them, well, what happens? It's the power of the purse.
And some of those incentives that the federal government was going to give people for buying those EVs, the number of those EVs has gone down because there
Exactly.
were too many parts made in China.
Yes. Just not to belabor the point, but when it comes to EVs, I've been reading a number of stories and just had some of their headlines here about how researchers in Great Britain are talking critically of electric vehicles because of the harm they do to the atmosphere due to the kind of tires that are necessary for these EV vehicles, the electric vehicles. It takes you just can't slap on your 15-inch
Firestone
tire out
500s.
here, or the Firestone, whatever. It takes a stronger tire to carry the weight of that EV. And so what the researchers have found, they contend it's harming the atmosphere, harming the climate due to the kind of tires that have to be manufactured. Just another aside.
Wow. Looking far into the future, whenever the NASCAR is doing electric cars, and they crank the sound up,
Yeah.
crank it up, and you go, I don't know. I'm not sure they're going to have Trace Atkins going, put yourself on an EV tire. It's just, I mean, there are so many changes that are going to come along as this happens. And this is growing pains you're talking about here,
That's what it is.
unintended consequences,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
It's fascinating. Okay, so Canoe is the thing we're going to be watching when you got $3 billion worth of orders, but you don't have enough money to fulfill the orders. I mean, it's also a Wall Street story, 57 cents. So if you feel like gambling, go get you some of that right now. So,
Well, yeah, true. And we'll be following the OG&E rate hike. And of course, then PSO is going to come back before us as well when we learn what this administrative law judge is recommending. And if you remember, I think the story I had last week on the conclusion of this 3-day long hearing by this administrative law judge into PSO's latest request, Corporation Commission Chairman Todd Hyatt, sitting in on that hearing, this was at the very end of my story, concluded that he didn't think he could go along with what they had, the way it was presented. So there could be some opposition to this project by PSO. We'll let you know.
and you learn, and here's how you get to know. You subscribe to OK Energy Today simply by doing what, Mr. Bohnen?
Well, go to okenergytoday.com, and a little up in the right-hand corner is an area where you can subscribe, and it's a free subscription, and it comes to your mailbox every morning.
And perhaps one morning really soon, you'll be reading some more UFO stuff on OK Energy because,
yeah,
listen, those spaceships are powered by something.
I know, that's right. And maybe we'll be whisked away to find out, what is powering them.
Yeah, that'd be the one they would bring back. Please.
Dispose of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jerry. See you next week.
You're welcome.